Well, do you see a collapse, though, of the international monetary system or just the United States' financial system?
Well, what? I'll tell you what's happening. You want to know what's going on economically right now?
Yep.
Behind the scenes right now, France is broke. France basically about 2 months ago declared bankruptcy to most of the international banks. Germany's quite possibly not far behind. The euro hit. I've been doing some forex trading, and we had a really bad day because the euro hit $1.47 and change. That means that with the euro going up, that means that they can't export anything. That means the French and the Germans are screwed. They can't export anything to anywhere else in the world. That also means that with the U.S. economy tanking and with the U.S. dollar plunging to new lows, that means that you now have BMW moving factories into the United States. You now have Boeing getting contracts. You have Airbuses now being moved into the U.S. because the dollar is so cheap here.
Well, that's a good thing, right?
It is in one aspect because we've kind of become the new Guatemala, if you will.
You mean our workers will become those lower paid workers?
Well, because what's happened because of the dollar, because the dollar is tanking. Back in March of 2006, they took the Federal Reserve note off the M3 index, and once they did that, they didn't have to explain to anybody how much currency was actually in circulation. That was the only thing because that index had all kinds of things that went. I mean, wages went against it, prices went against it. People could have sort of an idea as to how much money is in circulation, and they basically just said, "We're not going to tell you how much money is in circulation." I did an interview. I had a conversation with the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, and I printed it in my newsletter. And I flat out asked him, and this was about 2 years or so ago, I said, "How much money is in circulation?" And he said, I don't know, about $650 to $700 billion cash is actually in circulation. And I said, what's the national debt? And he said, well, it's about $8 trillion. And I said, what does the national debt have to be paid in? And he said, well, Federal Reserve notes. It's like, well, how are we supposed to pay the national debt when there's not enough money in the world to actually pay it? And he said, I don't know. And, eloquent answer, I don't know. He said, we're going to go to some kind of credit debit system where they're not even going to bother printing the money anymore. It's going to be photonic. It's all going to be blips of light and photons and all on your credit card, and eventually, which will go to an RFID identifying chip system, which is the
cashless society.
Yeah, of course, a cashless society because now, and here's the really scary thing. I mean, the next step is there are people talking behind the scenes now that the euro is going crazy, that the central banks now have done the exact same thing to the Europeans that the Federal Reserve did to the United States beginning in 1913. In 1913, here's an interesting conspiracy theory for you, the only people that could have stopped the Warburgs and the Morgans and the bankers, the Rothschilds and these gangs from forming the Federal Reserve were people like the Astors, and they all died on the Titanic. So the minute all the wealthy people die on the Titanic, it then allowed them to set up the central bank and set up the Federal Reserve in 1913.
Now, there's not another conspiracy there.
Oh, there is, but it has to do with them withholding reports and the prize that was given to the captain for making the crossing in record time and sailing right into an ice field. But the Astors died, and that allowed them to all meet at Jekyll Island and form the Federal Reserve and basically get complete control of the money supply. It took them 20 years from 1913 to 1933 to bankrupt the government of the United States. What is happening in Europe is that the European Union and the formation of a central currency there, they are doing exactly the same thing to the Europeans they did to us. They will bankrupt out Europe, and once they bankrupt out Europe and form a depression, if you will, they'll be able to gain complete control of assets, and they'll do everything to the Europeans that they did to the United States between 1933 and 1945. You're just seeing an acceleration of that process now. And with France, and France is done. I mean, you'll see riots in France by the end of this year. By January, February, you'll see riots in Paris. You'll see riots all over because their entire social structure is going to completely collapse. The country's bankrupt. They can't export anything. Germany's the same way. And
why allow this to happen?
Because it allows them to get control of assets in the United States. They're talking about maybe just letting the dollar collapse. And if the dollar collapses in the United States, then that means if the U.S. dollar is worth the same as the Canadian loon and tune, and if it then becomes worth the same as the peso in Mexico, they're already minting the Amero out of Denver.
You're right.
Which means that they then replace the currency, and over and over and over again, I've been saying that the currency for North America, for the NAU, the North American Union, again, something I've been talking about since the Vajra Chronicles of 1994, that the NAU will be the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and they introduced the Amero, and the Ameros are silver, and they'll all be backed by silver. And you just saw silver hit my other benchmark, which was $15. I talked about it before. Yep. I started recommending silver on the program back when it was $3. Then I said it was going to go to 9 by Christmas of 2005. Then I said it was going to go to 13, and it went to 13. Now it's up to 15.33. Silver's going to hit $30 by next year. You'll see silver at $30, and you will see gold. Here's a major prediction for you kids. But let's talk about a year from now. Let's project out a year. Let's call it spring of 2008, but you'll see gold, and I never thought I would say this because I always figured when gold hits about 800 or 850, it's like the speed of light. The bigger gold gets, the more gold just seems to appear.
Get the number out. How much?
I'm talking $1,200.
Wow.